On the last day of 1984, the trees and the land were bleak in southern Ontario. The first snow came that night, but not before a horrifying discovery. The body of a 9-year-old girl, so badly mangled it was recognizable only by a pair of white bobby socks. Communities like Queensville have become safe havens for urban refugees from Metro Toronto, an hour's drive south. So safe that on October 3rd, 1984, when Christine left school at 3:40 for the 5-minute trip home on her school bus, there would be nobody there to meet her. Leslie Chipman watched her drive off.
We had plans to go home and just have a snack and get our dolls together and then come and meet down here at the park.
She was seen at this country store buying a package of gum just before 4 p.m. Moments later, Robert Atkinson saw her at this intersection waiting, a recorder in her hand.
I said to my friend, I said, well, hey, let's get this little girl to play the tune while we're sitting here. I said, well, we're waiting.
Chipman would later testify she arrived at the playground looking for Christine at about 4.
Just sat with my dolls and waited for Christine to come, and she never did.
Christine was never seen again, except by her killer. Within hours of her disappearance, hundreds of volunteers fanned out across the countryside. But as the hours became days, then weeks, then months, the fear crystallized.
Christine?
You could hear it in the voice of Christine's father, Bob Jessup.
She wouldn't hurt anybody. Just wouldn't hurt anybody at all.
Christine's adopted brother, Kenny.
You'd wake up every morning thinking that you'd see Christine in the hallway. It took a very long time to adjust that thinking that, no, she isn't here, and eventually, no, she'll never be here.
89 days after she disappeared, they found her body. It was New Year's Eve. She'd been raped, then mutilated. It would take almost 8 years to convict the man they accused of killing her, Guy Paul Morin.
I know I'm not the killer. They can say all they want, but I know I'm not the killer.
The Jessup case was a high-profile, high-pressure challenge for a regional police force with little experience investigating murder. The murder of a child was particularly traumatic for Durham region, which is mostly rural and small town. But the case also promised glory to whoever caught the killer, and nobody felt the pressure more than detectives John Shepard and Bernie Fitzpatrick, two ambitious veterans on the Durham Regional Force. Valentine's Day, 1985. The murder investigation seemed to be stalled, especially for Shepard and Fitzpatrick. That day they visited the Jessups, and when they left, Fitzpatrick had a cryptic entry in his notebook about the young man who lived next door with his parents, Paul Morin, clarinet player, weird-type guy, Kenny Jessup.
They were a very strange family. They were up all night, working in the yard. They were just very strange.
What did you think of Guy Paul Morin before all this happened?
He just seemed odd.
Odd. A small-town view of people who were working outdoors under living room lamps the night everybody else searched for little Christine Jessop. Odd. A family whose affection for each other made the neighbors nervous. Odd. Guy Paul Morin's idea of a good time was looking after beehives, fixing up old cars, playing old-fashioned music on the clarinet. He had an old-fashioned trust in the law. Once, when he was late for a band performance, he flagged down a policeman.
I said to my buddy, we gotta get over there. There's no taxis around. I saw a cruiser that was just going by on the street, and I flagged him down. He was nice.
He says, jump in.
He's jumping. And here, we stop in front of the place. I said, hey, can't get out of here. They didn't have handles in the back of the cruiser. So that was my first time.
So
It was a good first time.
It was a good first time.
It was a good first time.
The second time was outside his home. 8 days after their visit to the Jessups marked him as a weird-type guy, detectives John Shepherd and Bernie Fitzpatrick invited him into their car for a chat they secretly recorded. Curiously, the comment they would later say incriminated him came after their hidden tape recorder stopped. That innocent little girls grow up to be corrupt.
Like I told the police, she was a sweet and innocent child. And that's how I remember her, and I still remember her that way.
Police made an awful lot out of that observation, didn't they?
Amazingly so. Yes.
Whatever he meant, Shepherd and Fitzpatrick finally had a suspect, but there was one problem. Kenny Jessup and his mother had told the police that on October 3rd, 1984, they arrived home at 4:10 and Christine was already gone. Morin had clocked off work in Toronto at 3:32. The earliest he could have arrived home was 4:15. If Christine was already gone by 4:10, he couldn't have taken her. Fitzpatrick and Shepherd went back to see the Jessups. Mrs. Jessup recalculated the time they arrived home from 4:10 to between 4:30 and 4:40.
What time did you and your mother come home that afternoon?
That's a confusing thing because we originally said 4:10 or somewhere around there. Honestly, I don't know. It was a while after 4:10. The Crown suggests around 4:30, 4:40. That's conceivable.
In early April at band practice, an undercover policewoman posing as a student hairdresser snipped some hair samples from Morin's head. Under a microscope at Toronto Centre for Forensic Sciences, his hair looked similar to a hair found tangled in a necklace Christine had been wearing. The hair convinced the police they'd found their killer.
He lost control of himself and murdered her.
With the help of the FBI, the Durham police tried to reconstruct the murder and assemble a profile of the murderer.
He is a night person.
The profile sounded a lot like Morin. At the April 18th press conference, they said there were 5 suspects, but there was really only 1. 5 days later, as Morin drove off to another band practice, the police closed in. He noticed a red light flashing behind him.
I thought my seatbelt. I better pull over, and I did so.
Morin recognized the officers who'd pulled him over, Shepherd and Fitzpatrick, the friendly cops he'd chatted with in his driveway.
Initially, I said, "Oh, it's you guys." Like, I was surprised, really, to see them. They said, "Well, you're under arrest for the murder of Christine Jessop, your neighbor." I said, "Right. Come on, guys. You're kidding." He said, "No, Guy, we're not. We know what we're doing. We don't make mistakes."
They handcuffed him and drove him to a Durham police station in Whitby. Passing through the lobby of 18 Division headquarters, he saw a familiar woman in a police uniform, the woman at band practice who took his hair sample.
The student hairdresser was a cop, and that gave me a hollow feeling. This is real. This is real. Then I was brought into a small room. And there was that's the room I stayed in for all of 6.5 hours.
In the room, there was a large blow-up of his fingerprint. The police told him it came from Christine's clothes.
They are your fingerprints, they are on her clothing, and that's your fingerprint up there. And I said, it's impossible. I have never touched that child, physically touched that child.
The fingerprint was his, but it didn't come from Christine's clothes. It came from one of his clarinets. It was a tactic to get him to confess.
And they said, look, just be easy on yourself and just let it out. It'll save your parents lots of dollars. It'll cost your parents within a 6-digit range. And how they were right about that.
Back in Queensville, a dozen policemen were searching his parents' home for proof he was a murderer. They searched for 12 hours and took away 4 bins full of personal belongings, but not one scrap of evidence.
Was there a moment when one of you looked at the other and says, my God, did he do it, or maybe he did it, or...
Never.
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 To us, this was just an unholy nightmare.
Never. We could account for him 100%.
If I knew he had done this, I wouldn't have spent $1 on him.
Across the hedge at the Jessup home, there was a different reaction on the evening of April 22nd.
Jubilation that finally someone's been caught.
This wasn't just an ordinary day for you anyway.
When he was actually arrested, it was my birthday. So it was like a birthday present from the police department for me.
For the next 9 months, this would be a familiar image on the evening newscasts of southern Ontario. Guy Paul Morin, child killer, brought down by dogged police work. By the time he got to trial, there would be one thunderous dissent.
There is no reason to suspect that this kid murdered her as opposed to anybody else in the universe.
Toronto lawyer Clayton Ruby, famous for taking on tough criminal cases, decided to defend Morin. First, by challenging the integrity of the Crown.
A police force and a prosecutor who deal with that kind of situation need a special kind of integrity. To say, no, we build the case first and then we arrest someone. In this case, at the first hint of a bit of evidence, they just grabbed him. And then they started trapping him and building the case against him.
This is where they hoped the case would be built, the Center for Forensic Sciences. This is where a technician named Stephanie Nizhnik analyzed the necklace hair. The police said she told them the necklace hair matched Morin's. In court, Nizhnik would only say the two hairs shared some characteristics, that the necklace hair might or might not be his. Investigators plucked thousands of microscopic fibers from Guy Paul Morin's car. 5 linked him to Christine Jessop, not surprising since they were next-door neighbors and used the same laundromat. The prosecution actually ran a test that confirmed fibers could be transferred to any number of people using the same washer and dryer. They kept that finding to themselves. As Morin sat in Whitby jail, the police tried again for a confession. They bugged his cell. An undercover cop named Hobbs tried to get him talking. The tape recorded Morin imitating Jack Nicholson in the movie The Shining, shouting the word redrum, murder spelled backwards. Hobbs claimed Morin said he redrums the innocent, but that isn't clear from the tape.
Did you say to this man, in the context of Christine Jessop, I redrum the innocent, just like you?
I don't believe I did say it. But I went along with my lawyer who said, it sounds like maybe it is there on the tape. And I said, I can't remember at all ever saying that. I don't believe I did. He said, well, it sounds like it. And when I had to get up on that stand to testify, all I could do is just justify in the event if I did say that.
A month later, Detective Shepard visited Whitby, where 2 inmates were claiming to have heard Morin confess. Shepard made a deal with Robert May and a man who can't be identified. Reduced charges if they could get the confession on tape. They didn't, but agreed to swear to the confession in court anyway.
How did that happen? How could you possibly have said something to be interpreted that specifically?
I've never confessed to anyone. Ever. I did not do this crime. He perjured himself when he testified. Out of anyone throughout that whole trial, or throughout this whole crap that's happened to me, I can seriously say I know I've never confessed to anyone. Mr. May lied under oath.
Time and space were key to Morin's defense. He says he left work at 3:32 October 3rd and went grocery shopping. The Crown asserts he went straight home, arriving at 4:15, grabbed Christine, drove 50 kilometers following a complex route, raped and killed the little girl, cleaned up and drove the 50 kilometers back home. His parents swore he arrived home that day with groceries at 5:30. Taking what the Crown and his parents say, he had 75 minutes to do the impossible: driving, raping, murdering, shopping. The Crown never directly attacked the 5:30 arrival time, they just ignored it. Morin's defense seemed solid, but Clayton Ruby wanted some insurance that even if his client were found guilty, he'd never have to do time in a penitentiary. He decided to enter evidence that Morin was mentally ill. Dr. Basil Orchard was one of 3 psychiatrists Ruby consulted, the only one to diagnose an illness, simple schizophrenia.
He had some opposite feelings about the same thing at the same time. It's called ambivalence. And he had a strongly interned or self-directed train of thought. I mean, he played in a band, but he focused on his instrument.
There are a couple of psychiatrists who saw him at the same time who didn't find that he was mentally ill. How do you account for that?
Every psychiatrist, I suppose, is entitled to his own opinion.
You admit yourself into a psychiatric analysis, or for them to analyze you? I can assure you, or I'd like to believe so, he'll walk out with a label on you.
Well, that was some label that they stuck on you. What did you think at the time?
Oh, that's a load of crock.
In the end, the insanity argument was academic. The jury decided on the evidence that he was not guilty. Morin went free, but the taint of insanity stuck and would hang like a cloud over his future. In Queensville, the fear returned, and with it, the loathing.
Well, I think it's terrible that he got off. Personally, I think he should be hung. The real estate value of Queensville is going to drop dramatically. You know, it's going to, the bottom's going to drop right. I think he's guilty.
Yeah, we can't say that.
No, we can't say that, no, but the police arrested him, right?
In the Jessup home, the jury's verdict was unbelievable.
Guy Paul Morin killed her.
How can you be so sure?
Clayton Ruby, his defense lawyer, saw his defense was going nowhere, so he decided to change to not guilty by reason of insanity. And that's when I knew, for sure in my mind, no doubts.
When we come back, a new trial, the jurors and their judgment.
You ready
Yep,
at the beginning?
I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm lifting. You got it? No dropping.
Guy Paul Morin returned to his bees and the life he'd enjoyed before the trial, but all around him there was unfinished business, a possible lawsuit for false arrest, and the fear in the community that there was a child killer on the loose.
You knew they were going to come and get him again.
Oh, yes. That wasn't finished. That was just the tip of the iceberg. That was just the beginning. That's how we felt about it. It wasn't going to be laid to rest overnight.
Almost immediately, Crown lawyers appealed Guy Paul Morin's acquittal, and 2 years later, the Supreme Court of Canada ordered a new trial. 3 more years would pass before the new trial would start. 3 years which would illuminate a profoundly flawed investigation which started the day Christine disappeared and got worse the day her body was discovered. New Year's Eve 1984, it snowed, complicating the search at the body site. Vital evidence may have been lost as officers, ignoring basic procedures, poked around with garden tools. Sergeant Michael Michalowski was in charge of the search. A button found at the scene later went missing. A cigarette package became a milk carton and then vanished. A cigarette butt disappeared, oddly enough, after police discovered Morin was a non-smoker. Michalowski later had to produce a butt at the first trial, so he submitted a substitute. Another policeman said it was his. But Clayton Ruby tripped them up.
I asked him what brand he smoked. I went out and got later on that brand, and when you compared the butt with his brand, they didn't match, so it was clearly a fake.
It was later discovered that Michalowski covered his tracks by rewriting his notes, adding new information as he went. He later wound up in court himself, charged with perjury and obstructing justice. The charges were stayed for health reasons.
It's a mess. It's a gumshoe operation, but a first-class lie cover-up.
Five months after Christine's body was discovered, one of the most bizarre episodes in the Christine Jessop tragedy. Kenny Jessup said he was having bad dreams. Part of his sister's body was still in the woods. He and his parents went to the body site.
I was convinced that she wasn't all in the grave, and we went out and looked around a bit, and I looked down, there were just a pile of bone, or not a pile, a few bones right at my feet. And I have no explanation for it. I have no explanation whatsoever.
They carried the bones in a styrofoam cup to a nearby police station. That was the last anybody would hear of the incident for almost 5 years. But were they really Christine's bones? There was only one way to find out. Exhume the body and do a second autopsy. As the little casket emerged, the Jessup family stood grieving at the graveside. A special team was waiting for the casket in Toronto. Dr. Jerry Melby was there when they opened it.
There was a brand new Cabbage Patch doll on top of the police bag. It was hard, and that was a very quiet autopsy room.
But the biggest surprise was to come when they discovered how much Ontario's chief pathologist had missed in the 1985 autopsy.
The girl had been beaten in the face, multiple stab wounds, and then more mutilation, trying to take off the head. A knife wound so deep in the gut that it penetrated to the back of the vertebrae. It was very shocking. We had a whole new homicide on our case.
We showed the report of the second autopsy to Dr. Basil Orchard, the psychiatrist who's been seeing Morin since 1985.
I don't think he could do it. Over that whole period of time that I was seeing him, I'd have picked out some signs of tendencies towards dangerous or violent behavior.
What kind of a person would commit a crime like that?
A sadistic sexual psychopath.
Have you seen any trace of such a condition in Guy Paul Morin?
None at all. None.
Lost cigarette butts, missing bones, a botched autopsy. As they prepared for the second trial, Morin's defense lawyers were discovering investigative blunders which, in their view, may have helped the real killer escape. A massive amount of evidence was lost, but even worse, the police may have ignored or concealed information that led away from Morin and pointed toward other theories of how Christine Jessop disappeared and died. Example, on October 3rd, 1984, Leslie Chipman expected to meet Christine at this park. She got there sometime between 4 and 4:30. If Christine was taken from the park and not from home, the exact time of Leslie's arrival is critical, but nobody cared much.
I tried to tell them exactly what times it was and what time Christine was supposed to meet me and where we were supposed to meet, and I told them everything I knew about that, and it never really seemed to come into the case.
They just didn't seem interested?
No, they didn't seem interested.
Robert Atkinson saw Christine Jessop standing at this intersection near the park at 4 o'clock. He told a policeman he saw an older boy with her. Detectives Shepard and Fitzpatrick corrected him 6 years later on the eve of the second Morin trial.
That's when I was told that, you know, the boy was actually a girl.
So you didn't see a boy at all?
No, it was a girl. So,
you believe the police officers?
I certainly do, yeah.
Not far from where Christine Jessop's body was discovered, a man named Gabriel Polgar saw a suspicious car pull to the side of the road on an evening around October 3rd. When he drew up alongside, a large man dashed out of the bushes towards the rear of the parked car.
The trunk of his lid was just up about 3 inches.
Yeah.
So, but I couldn't look in it. And as soon as he come running out, he saw me and he shut the lid, and he was looking at me like kind of nervous. He's sweating quite a bit. And I thought I'd better leave it. He looked like he's going to come at me or something. You know, that looked kind of scary.
Polgar departed quickly, but never forgot the strange encounter. After Christine's body was found, he contacted detectives John Shepard and Bernie Fitzpatrick.
And when I told them what I saw, they kind of looked at each other. I could see it. And he wasn't happy with what I said by the look of it. Well, he said, okay, well, come and check it out. And they never showed up, so.
They never came?
No.
Christine's body was found near this lonely road. There were only 3 houses nearby. Lydia Robertson told police she heard screams late on the night Christine went missing.
I heard cries for help. Help, help, and no, don't. It must have been half an hour later, a child cried out real loud, you know, like it was hurt.
The screams continued for half an hour. First, she thought it was a domestic fight, but her neighbors also said they heard it. If they were right, it might have cleared Morin. He was home with his parents. Early police reports attached significance to their stories, but there was no follow-up. Then 5 years later, Detective Shepard reenacted the screaming at a different time of day in different conditions, at supper time with traffic, predictably with different results. He couldn't hear the screams.
I don't know if I should use the same words. He says, I think you're full of it. Like I didn't hear a thing.
Did you ever doubt what you'd heard?
No, never doubted myself.
You are absolutely sure of what you
Yes, I was sure.
6.5 years after Christine's death, the prosecution buckled down once again to convict the man they were sure had killed her. To fail a second time would be to invite the consequences of having bungled a highly sensitive case, not the least of which would be the possibility of a massive lawsuit by the Morin family. The media gathered once again in London at the same courthouse. Some key players had changed. Leading the prosecution team was Leo McGuigan, tenacious, imaginative, and not accustomed to losing. Against him, Jack Pinkowski, a top criminal lawyer known in the trade for flamboyant tactics and a numbing attention to detail. By now, the strain had taken a toll on the Jessup family. Janet Jessup was estranged from her husband Bob. But Guy Paul Morin remained the center of attention as the trial unfolded through weeks and months. Constantly pursued, he was secretly terrified by the attention.
Everyone's looking at you. You say one word improperly, it's logged. And if you're not a linguist or articulate, it's used against you.
Soon to be in the spotlight, Kenny Jessup, Christine's brother. He disclosed to the trial that he and 2 other boys had sex with each other and with Christine from the time she was 5 until she was 8.
You must have known you were putting yourself in some danger. People would say, maybe Kenny and his friends did it. Maybe they just wanted to keep her quiet.
That's been said. People can think what they want. I know the truth. You know, I sleep at nights.
Guy Paul Morin was still the accused, and the evidence was basically the same as before. The necklace hair. Hair samples from Christine's classmates also showed similarities. Fibers weren't conclusive in the first trial. The confession in the first trial, the 2 former jailbirds who claimed to hear the confession, Robert May and one who can't be named, looked like con men making deals to help frame Morin. This time it had to look like they were testifying only because they were good citizens. So McGuigan told them there'd be no repercussions if they didn't show up. But Jack Pinkowski says the prosecution couldn't really afford to lose their vital evidence. But Jack Pinkowski says the prosecution couldn't really afford to lose their vital evidence.
He told the jury he was promising to give them this evidence of this confession. They supposedly went to these people and said to them, you don't have to testify if you don't want to. However, if these people had accepted the offer, the supposed offer, and not testified, it would have resulted in a mistrial.
The gamble worked where it counted most. The jurors got the message. Juror Gary Coyle.
The 2 inmates, even though...
This is the alleged confession.
The alleged confession, yeah. To me, these people went through hell in that trial to give evidence that they didn't have to give. They didn't have to be there.
And what effect did that have on their credibility?
As far as what they gave me in evidence, I found them to be very credible.
Juror Al Baxter.
Were given the option not to appear, and they did appear and they did testify, and because of that, they became more credible. Even though they, by personality, they weren't credible.
In the end, the jury decided. For Heather Dryfoot, it was the evidence and a gut reaction to Morin.
Wasn't there a moment when something pushed you one way or the other?
Yeah, there was. There was. Probably the testimony of Guy Paul.
What was it about the testimony of Guy Paul?
The lack of eye contact with us. Never looked at the jury once while he was on the stand.
By the end of the second Morin trial, the defense thought they'd demolished the Crown case, proving extensive police ineptitude and misconduct along the way. On July 30th, the trial ended. The jury brought in its verdict, and Guy Paul Morin couldn't believe his ears.
I looked at my jury. Not one of them faced me. One had tears in her eyes. I looked at my defense. Wow. Obviously, I did hear properly. I heard what that one foreman did say. We find the accused, Guy Paul Morin, guilty of first-degree murder. Yeah, I remember those words.
The case has already yielded a book, Redrum the Innocent, by reporter Kirk Macon, who sat through 2 years of trial and pre-trial skirmishing.
The defense lawyers were unable to focus their case. It was an overwhelming amount of evidence that they had, and they just couldn't seem to pick out the right elements and put them to the jury. It didn't always feel like a trial where the purpose was to get a not guilty verdict, which is, of course, why they're there.
And how would you rate the performance of the prosecution?
They did a brilliant job. There's a lot of play acting in a case like this, and they were a lot better at it than the defense was in this case, and you could see the jury going for that.
Prosecutor Leo McGuigan was ready to celebrate.
I might just go and have a beer.
That really got to me. You know, put a man away for 25 years and then you can go home and enjoy a beer. It didn't matter whether they were right or wrong, whether the kid did it or not. It was imperative for them to win at all costs, to set back the system back on its feet the way it should look like.
Jack Penkovsky was devastated by the verdict and couldn't hide it.
Today, an innocent man was found guilty. We intend to appeal this verdict.
After almost 8 years, the Jessup family finally had something to celebrate.
There was no smoking gun in this, but circumstantial cases can be just as credible and just as strong as cases where there's witnesses. So I am quite certain the person that killed her is in jail.
I've seen hundreds of papers in front of me over the years, and in the end I just see myself as a piece of paper. Thousands and thousands
A mountain of paper.
A mountain of paper over what? They all talk hour after hour, the Crowns, the defense. They both do their roles, their act, and another day goes by and they continue on, taxpayers' money being consumed, and where's the end?
When we return, information the jury never heard. In 1984, Paul Wilson was 17. He lived for a while near where Christine Jessop's body was found. Around the time she disappeared, he was working for an auto shop in Newmarket, a short drive from Queensville.
Several things started to click. You know, he was carrying a big knife in his pocket all the time.
His boss, George Fair, grew suspicious when he arrived at work 3 days after Christine went missing and saw what Wilson was doing.
He was washing the truck, hosing the truck inside still.
Inside?
Inside of it, yeah. And he used the cleaner, the industrial cleaner.
He called police, and 2 detectives, Joe Laughlin and Reg Webster, came to see him.
We showed them the truck and everything. They looked around. He says, well, nothing looks, you know, there's no blood inside and all that. And that was the end of it.
Police never had the van analyzed, and Wilson soon dropped out of sight. 5 years later, Morin's defense team found out about Wilson. Only then did the Durham police track him down, and finally cleared him. Tom Atkins became a suspect after his estranged wife had him charged for sexual abuse of a 5-year-old, Dorothy Atkins.
She was threatened with the rifle that he used to have, that if she told me that he would shoot me and her brother and her, and he used to carry a pocket knife with him constantly. He threatened her with that many times.
Police later discovered Atkins had a fondness for kiddie porn like this, also that he'd molested his daughter from a previous marriage. They learned that he sometimes drove to work through Queensville. Detectives Webster and Laughlin conducted a long and vivid interview with Dorothy Atkins. They explained how she could help them.
Compile a profile to see if Tom maybe fit the pattern of whatever had happened to Christine Jessop. So during this and during the questions they asked me, I had to recount 12 years of our sex life together.
Atkins told police he'd been working October 3rd, but his boss denied it. He changed his story. He'd been making preserves for the winter. The detectives, Laughlin and Webster, got a search warrant for his house, but before they carried out the search, Atkins agreed to take a lie detector test. We talked to Tom Atkins in a Toronto donut shop.
They just asked me would I mind going down for a polygraph test, and I passed with flying colors, no problem.
He passed the polygraph. For the Durham police, that was good enough. His house was never searched. Case closed. The detectives lost interest in Tom Atkins, but not in Dorothy. At an Oshawa courthouse today, Atkins was sentenced for molesting a child. Detective Laughlin slid up to her and asked her for a date.
Why are you asking me out? I said, is it because you find me attractive or you find me interesting? Or is it something that I told you about my sex life during the interview? And I will admit he was honest with me. He said, no, it was certain acts that you and Tom had performed that intrigued me, so that's why I thought I'd ask you out. And then it was about a week later than the other detective was on his way through to visit a friend's cottage, and he dropped in and asked the same thing.
She turned him down, but took the first officer up on his proposition.
Suffice it to say, I got even with the one of them, but not in the way maybe that I should have. But when you're talking about two officers of the law, who are you going to complain to?
Teenager Mike Taylor became a suspect in the Jessup case after police got a phone call from his probation officer. He'd been in trouble for some sex-related incidents involving children. He'd also worked at Queensville Cemetery, where Christine Jessop liked to play. Detectives Laughlin and Webster went to his school, where officials claimed he was dangerous, a drug user. Basil Mangano was a private detective who worked for Morin's lawyers. He investigated Taylor, too.
Threatened his sister with a gun, gone after his father, or threatened his father with a chainsaw.
Taylor's own family provided an alibi. He'd worked on their house and then gone to the Legion to get their father. Police accepted Taylor's alibi while continuing to build a case against Guy Paul Morin, who they considered a weird-type guy. Detective Mangano says 4 years later, Taylor's sister contradicted her own story.
Right away, she suspected that her brother was involved. Yet, if her brother had been with her the prior afternoon, as she subsequently alleged, she would have right away, you would think, say, well, where was he? Wait a second, well, he was with me.
She has never changed her story with the police, and Taylor remains cleared as a suspect in the Jessup case. We showed the jurors some of the videotaped information we'd gathered. They never heard about the other suspects or about the nature of the police investigation into them. The trial judge, after listening to submissions, ruled evidence presented about other suspects inadmissible, said it was irrelevant and didn't prove anything.
I heard cries for help. Help, help.
The jury never heard about the screams in the night. The defense never raised them.
What does that say to you, or what effect does that have?
It could have made a big difference in our decision, possibly, if we'd had some of this other information. I don't understand why we didn't have this information.
It would have challenged you again, that's for darn sure. It would have made you question a lot more things. It still brings me back to what we were given. There was enough there.
I just went on what I had.
Well, you told me before, that you're able to sleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that enables a juror to sleep soundly after an experience like that?
Believing in what you did was the very best that you could have done. And I believe that. I did the best job I could do with what I was given.
You've just seen a woman who lived near the body site where the body was discovered, who heard screams in the night around the time Christine Jessop disappeared. Should that have been evidence?
Certainly, if it was there, if the police had access to that information, it should have been. I wanted every piece of information that I could get my hands on.
How has this experience affected your appreciation of the justice system and how that system works?
I guess I'm a little frightened with the justice system now. Because you learn, well, we have learned anyway after the trial, that there was other information there. There was other evidence that could have been given. They're there to do a job. Jesus, you better have all the tools. And it seems like somewhere along in the trial, they start taking those tools away from you. And you start to question the justice system.
It was a miscarriage of justice. Maybe we should have heard this stuff. Again, I have to assume that the police cleared these people, and that's why we didn't hear from them. It seemed like it was a fairly thorough police investigation, even though there was some problems in the police investigation. But just to have a suspect because they got a dead person, it doesn't make sense that they would just slaughter a lamb out there. And that's the indication I'm getting from these tapes, that he's a lamb. Maybe he's being slaughtered. I don't know.
We talked to a lot of people while preparing this story. A lot of people we wanted to talk to on camera declined. The pathologist responsible for the first autopsy, the technicians who analyzed the evidence tying Morin. After 8 years, there is no peace for Christine Jessop or her old neighbors, the Morins. Just unanswered questions.
I've never forgotten her. I don't think many people have.
Who killed Christine Jessop?
If we knew, our Paul would not be in prison.
Did you ever think of giving up?
Never.
Why should I give up on something that I know he didn't do? I'll die fighting if I have to.
Is this case over?
The sheer politics of what's taken place, the reputations that are on the line, the millions of dollars that have been spent for an appeal court to allow all of that to take place again, which is what they'll be doing if they call for a retrial, it is asking for a lot of courage on their part. I'm not sure they're going to do it. But at the same time, it's hard for me to believe that we're going to spend the next 25 or 35 years with Morin in jail in Kingston, and as a country that we can sit by and watch that.
Obviously, the system's allowed to pound away until they get what they want, even if it ends up to put an innocent man behind bars. And here's the case. One of many, I'm sure. Milgaard, Marshall, and who else? Morin.